Right, well, thank you all for coming. So this is an open monthly meeting that the Needham Housing Coalition has on this site. And we are, for any of you who don't know, a citizen group who has gotten together because we would like to see more housing choice in Needham. Different kinds of housing and in different price points. That's our goal. This year, obviously, we're all focused on what we're here to discuss tonight. Before we get started, I just want to say that I am Paula Dickerman, and I want to ask the other people who are in the coalition just to introduce themselves.
Afterwards.
Just Paula.
Dave Fresca.
Kathy Mertz.
And I am Sade Ratliff. I am working with the coalition as part of a program through Citizens Housing and Planning Association. So today I am the tech guy, but any other day I might be doing other things. Good to see you guys.
And we are so lucky to have that part. So the topic tonight is the 4 articles, 11, 8 through 11, that'll be up for vote at town meeting on Monday night that are related to the MBTA. The purpose of tonight is information sharing. We want to present some information. We want to hear your thoughts. We want everybody else in the room to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your questions, and we want to use the common knowledge in the room to answer those questions. So it's really about information sharing. I think I'll mention that we also have Lee Newman here, whose title is
Director of Planning and Community Development
for the town. Process wise,
If you want to see.
we're going to present a little bit of information and then open it up for comments and questions. I'll facilitate what's going on in the room, and Sade, yes, is going to facilitate a bunch of people that we have joining us on Zoom. I want to acknowledge that this topic has brought out some strong feelings in our residents. And I just want to ask us all to agree that we're open to hearing other people's opinions and we'll be always respectful of each other. See a bunch of thumbs up or nods around the room. Fantastic, right? Got that. I do want to do, before we launch in, a little sort of base setting. So please raise your hand. Don't know what the MBTA Communities Act is. Checking out Zoom.
Progress.
Okay.
We've all at least heard about it.
We're good.
No.
Everybody knows about argument. How about you know what it is, but you don't know what the town is proposing, what's going to be voted. Ready? Yes. Love you guys. All right.
Homework.
So I think what we'll do is just do a high level reminder of the 2 plans that are being offered for vote at town meeting. Communities Act, and then we'll open it up. You're on.
That's working. Good. Hello, folks on Zoom. Thank you for coming. This is going to be really short because obviously this is a master class. Go through details, but as you probably know from some signs around the room, we are a group that does believe we are at a point in Needham's growth that we need to respond to what's been presented over the last few years, a need for housing choice. And so we think that there's some important things ahead of us, decisions on Monday about what will be the right course of action to address that need. The base compliance plan is there to check the box and to actually do what the town is required to do. And I think one of the things that's for all of us to decide, and particularly those are going to be a town meeting, is whether or not we have a housing issue that we need to address, and then decide that, what's the right course of action. I think deciding to not do anything right now, has been, something that has been talked about, but I think it's worth knowing that since easily early 2000s, the town has looked and made adjustments in zoning changes in various stages, 2002, 2007, and a number of other ones, Lee can correct me, where they looked at making adjustments to zoning to address more housing, to create opportunities for housing, a special permit to add more height, more density, particularly around Chestnut. And so those things have not generated a whole lot of housing. So I think for people to think that we're gonna just see what we need to do and move on and solve it later, we've already been looking at it for a good chunk of time, for 20 years. So I think we do need to act, and so I am putting my finger on the scale a little bit, but I do want to make sure that everybody in the room understands that those two maps are essentially one that doesn't change. Essentially the thresholds for zoning, other than making it by right, and then the other map is one that sets a little bit more height and density. And I think it is the opportunity for creating an incentive to have housing potentially happen. As everybody, I don't know if people that went on the walking tours or saw the videos of the walking tours, but over the summer there were 3 days that we took walking tours of the whole district, looked at it, looked at different examples of density, different examples of what properties may or may not change, and had those kinds of open discussions about what would it take to have housing actually happen here since all the land is developed. So I think it's challenging that that development to happen with the headwinds we know there for cost of land, cost of building, having to put together sites to create buildable, feasible properties that could become multifamily. Not easy. It's not open sites. So I think that's one of the challenges. It's going to make it a pretty slow process with limited results over a long period of time. I did summarize. Was that too brief? What else needs to be summarized? Yeah,
No, I think that,
it is a little.
yeah, you all seem to be informed, and so I'm guessing that you all maybe have something to say.
Yeah.
Or there is something you would like to throw, and find out what other people are thinking about your question. So I know beginnings are the hard part, the same for people on Zoom, obviously.
There.
It's the same. Well, whoever raises a hand first.
One question. Wow.
I think it'll be easier.
Sure. The objections that I've heard raised about the neighborhood plan have to do with questioning the assumptions that the consultants committee made about the load that the building that the neighborhood plan would permit, about the load that would place on. And I'm wondering if there's what that is, what responses there potentially may be next week to those objections when they're raised. That's number one. And the other question I have, I'll throw them both out now, is about 100 West Street. I bought a house on Dale Street in 1986. The fellow I bought it from was a machinist for the Carter's factory. That was a factory, and I've seen it go through its various iterations. But I understand that there's been an effort to sort of carve out and scale back what might be happening there in relation to the neighborhood plan. Curious about where that stands at this point.
Answer the second question.
So at the last planning board meeting, we met with Noon, who is the county member, who's very proposing, I think, 100 at our, and his concern was the number of that would be possible on that property. So these could be currently the zoning is drafted to establish a price situation, a maximum 44 dwelling units per acre, which build out of 189 dwelling units that site. But there's a provision in the zoning that allows for the planning board grant of that number. And it's not passed. So he's proposing a motion to amend that would cap that at, I think it's 53 dwelling units per acre, which is, I think, around 207 at that time. And that motion to amend has not been formally. And so what the planning board's position is going to be, because the planning board did have a productive conversation at their list. And will be taking a position on it, proposed change on it.
And forgive me, is he representing a lot of the neighbors who have expressed concern throughout the process about 100 West?
He said he was representing the neighbors of his neighborhood, and he wanted to, address the concerns that he was. Speaking of stuff. Sorry.
Anybody else want to speak on this before we Bill's first question? Yeah.
Just want to support said feedback annually. Same concern. The feedback that I have personally is about the exact same issue. West Street. And are you going to cap it at a point which they feel would sustain the livability of the area? So that's what it can be to, is mostly their concern, West Street.
Okay. Our two school experts are not here, so who wants to take a crack? Oscar? or-
yeah. I think, one of this complexity of response to this, to the extent that you're asking about what can the town do to respond to whatever the potential growth would be, and that's relative to infrastructure, so water, sewer, power, and then there's the traffic component and the school component. So they're kind of three buckets, let's say. And I think that for me, it's like this, so if you look at what he's saying, he's talked to a lot of other towns, being the tax assessor here in town, and was curious to understand what other towns had done to analyze the impacts of this MBTA law on their infrastructure. I had a rather specific talk with Lexington recently about that. And to the extent that he uncovered the responses, Needham is at a very high level of engagement and analysis relative to most of the other communities. And the results of those conversations were, and I think it's pretty obvious that it is a zone of the town that is mixed uses and it's got relatively existing infrastructure, let's say, that's in place, it's been looked at regardless of what's going on with the MBTA, and that the ability for the town to add additional density or response to density would be more along the lines of changing the size of the pipe when they do the expansion of the pipe, the extension. But most all of the mains are in, and any repair that would happen in the course of the towns. Essentially maintenance of that is all probably within manageability. The other thing that's interesting is that if you look at this, what is the current zoning with special permit, it's 1,636 units, and if you believe that the propensity for change is more logical than the really big number, which is essentially a math problem that says you clean the slate, build what the zoning says that's not going to happen. So the big numbers are kind of there to check the box for the state and to make the numbers work. But the reality is something in that propensity for change or a realistic assessment of what's going to happen over time is in that 1,800 for the neighborhood housing plan, and it's 400. And so that's a couple hundred units bigger than what's already been planned as a zoning maximum for that whole district. So it's not dramatically different for the infrastructure. For the traffic, the analysis done by the recent traffic GPI report was they looked at the impact of all of that housing being developed and put very conservative numbers on it and found 9 intersections out of the 15 that needed to be addressed, and 7 of them are already being addressed by the town. Address basically through traffic, so that it's probably fair to say that the majority of the traffic issues that we all feel is happening in that whole zone is probably a lot of it traffic. And so it's not necessarily generated by anything that would be immediately local. And of course, the whole premise of this law is that you're creating housing, your transit, so you're creating walkability, you're pushing down on the need for cars. So it's likely that the impact of the cars from the actual development is going to be manageable based on the fact that 7 out of 9 of those intersections are schools. Again, we've heard a lot of people who've put out different theories about what's the right ratio for the student per residential unit. And I think the analysis that's been done by the current home group with their consultant did a lot of analysis based on what they thought was good examples here in town of the ratios for multifamily housing generated by that. And I think if I'm summarizing what I've been hearing, and Lee can correct me, and anyone else can correct me, that because of the slow pace of the development and the happening over a period of time, the ability for the schools to adapt whatever is being planned for the big picture will be able to be handled in those changes being planned. And so it's comes down to what happens with whatever sort of happens in that in between time when all of the big plans for Mitchell and Pollard and getting Highwell back up to like the 6th elementary, which is out to 32, I think, is going to, there's the ability, I think Liz going to talk about this, the school, obviously, at the end of this, has said that we've been able to manage those kinds of changes, and I think that that's something within manageability, again, for what the schools can adjust. So I don't know if that's too much or too little, and if that raises other questions for everyone here and on Zoom. So yes.
I do have a question now, planning, and you kind of answered on the stuff I just been reading some materials. And I guess one of the questions that's raised is what percentage of units get built are going to have its children? And we have a couple of developments, big developments in town, Kendrick and Charles River and Charles River, but area.
Yeah.
Right, they have very low ratios. And then the more
Bodera.
This is in my head. So, that's a much higher ratio. I don't know, kind of what the town presentation is going to be on what the appropriate ratio is. You could average the 3, but is that a fair way to do it? Who knows? So, do you know, Lee, where the town is coming up, what Katie King is going to say about this?
Average, and I think they added actual couple of other apartment developments to the beyond those 3 developments.
So are we at like 0.12 or 0.13 or something like that?
I don't remember the exact percent. Yes.
Okay, I'm sure there's going to
It is being done on an average basis, and the number of developments that are being looked at that has been enlarged.
Yeah, can I just say that there are, and we'll take a Zoom.
Yeah.
Well,
not, just shut it.
that there are, since, say 3 things. 1, we don't know. And nobody knows. And the analyses that are done make assumptions. And you can do a different analysis. Makes it very. However, there is an analysis. 24, I'm sure available that is the analysis that the town has done about schools. And as you mentioned, Leslie, chairman of our school committee, about this thing. I am led to believe this is fourth, what is it, second half, fourth half, that she is comfortable that we, the and absorb the number of children that are likely to be here because of this. Okay. Okay.
No question on Zoom, just in addition to the conversation that we're having. I think that, yes, we obviously want to have our town, not our town, I don't live there, I'd love to live there. You want your town to be able to handle the amount of children that come in, but I will caution folks when we are having these conversations, there is fair housing legislation and legislation that prevents your town from zoning in a way that deliberately excludes families with children. So there are legal protection for folks like that. So when we are having this conversation about school enrollment and what our capacity is, I would sort of encourage folks to not toe that line too closely of making it impossible for X amount of families to come into your community as opposed to, does that make sense? Are you following? Okay, I see nods. Just wanted to not violate any laws in the room.
All right, yeah. Please.
We do hear that, multifamily houses do consume resources. They don't just consume resources, right? They generate resources. They probably more in taxes than I do. I suspect I have nothing to back that up, but just my living for a long time tells me that. Yeah, you're not paying enough.
I am. I'm paying more than that.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that part of the analysis that the town did about everything, the fiscal impact, part of that. If y'all haven't looked at these materials, definitely encourage you. There's a ton of stuff out there. Done by the town, by Pluto, and on our website. It's not where I was going, but that's a great thing. We have links to a bunch of that stuff, so it's sort of one-stop shop. Then, fiscal impact, yeah, I mean, there's an amount of money that theoretically, in X number of things get billed, come into the taxes. So there is definitely an upside financial from that sort of bill.
So, when you think about the expenses the town incurs, higher density is more economical. Because if you think about the roadway, if you have houses that are spaced farther apart, you have more road for each house. You have more sewer pipes, you have more water pipes. All those things cost a lot of money to maintain. So we're talking about having a little bit higher density in the town centers. That provides a more economical model to support that housing, support those people.
Jared,
I've got two questions if I could. One, what is the percentage of units of new housing that would be 3 bedrooms? Because that, I think, would impact the school population. Secondly, how long do you anticipate the full build-out will take before they hit the numbers that we're looking at in either plan?
Now, two things. It's all market driven. So if there is a percentage, I'll defer to you on that, but there's nothing in this zone that addresses what is built, except that it is residential and it needs to be multi-family. So that's your first question. Yes.
Yes.
So we don't know, you know?
Well, the percentages that the home consultant used, was at 55% for the lower portion of ones and studios, 45 for the upper echelon, which broke down to 2 beds, 1 beds is 10% is 1 bed, 25 is 2 bed, 3 bed, 10% 3 bed, and 25% 2 bed. So there's a bottom heavy, that's done, that they've been doing this all over the state for different, and that's kind of the sweet spot for what they think is the mix of units, whether they're condominium or apartment. It really is a more generic cross section, what the mix of units would be. And so then they used different assumptions for 2 beds, and 3 beds, and I don't think they've used any children generated from studios with blondes, which is again based on analysis that they've been doing across the state.
The second question I asked about how long the West area would take for the full build up to take. It's based upon the number of contacts that have been sent to me, discussion with other members of the community. I'm convinced that they think that on Wednesday morning, after shot at the town meeting on Monday, right? That there's going to be this plethora of employees at 701 knocking down houses. So this may be a place to set everybody's mind at ease with some kind of a definite positive data.
Right, and that, of course, is market driven as well. And as we've been told from developers, which we're gonna let you do this one. It will, in my personal, so now I'm not speaking for anybody else, all of it will never be built according to the zoning that's allowed. It's just not the way it happens. Lois is telling me she's been here for many, many, many years. And how long does it take for a whole strip to turn over? Decades and decades. So that's one answer. I don't know if you want to enumerate, just get it out there, all the things that have, the stars that need to line up in order for it to happen, even given.
No, I had another question.
Yeah,
You went second.
no, I think it is essentially where it is speculation, but it is based on the fact that all of the land that's being rezoned is already built. And there's some multifamily on it, and then there are other commercial properties on it. So each one of those gets evaluated for whether it's going to be valued, whether it makes sense to change it. And there is a lot of land ownership, a lot of small parcel ownership, particularly on Chestnut, where there's not a lot of incentive to want to change that. And so that's essentially the reason why, to have any chance at housing to happen, you need the thresholds that are going to trigger somebody actually thinking that I'm going to go change what I've got.
I have a peripheral question. If it's inappropriate, you can just tell me. I've only been here since 67, not a long time. 1967. I'll tell you someday why I didn't come at 59, which was when I first tried to get to the my question is this, is first a comment question. With the additional population coming into town, I see that as an advantage for the commercial interests in town. So there's different ways for money to come to town, not just through our taxes.
Yes.
Right, and I see that part as positive, but I'm just wondering about something about the town. You're saying you're anticipating these people won't be driving because they're going to be close to a station. I know people and they drive. And I'm just wondering, we have very little parking when I go to shop in town. And even the municipal lot gets filled very quickly. Is there any planning to create additional parking areas as well as building areas for downtown? Are they looking at that at all? Because I think it's a potential problem. Now, if that doesn't fit to this conversation, we don't forget it.
There's no additional parking in Needham Center that we're looking at building.
We need
There
to-
is there's no additional parking in Needham Center or along Chester Street corridor or any of these districts that we're looking at currently to expand. And actually, we're showing that there's adequate parking. You just might have to walk a little farther from your space.
That's right. How I think the parking study.
It stands like just recently did a parking study.
So, I'll speak again from my personal viewpoint. So first of all, the last time I drove was on Sunday, and I commuted to work by bicycle Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, today, back, and shopping. I live down the street on Rosemary. So it's a reality. There are people who are embracing not having. My husband and I have one car between us. So more and more that is happening. And when we talk about zoning and building for the future and things that are gonna take decades to build, we should be thinking about what the world is gonna look like in 20, 30, 40 years. The other comment is we do have parking and you might have to walk a block or two. And I think we shouldn't be worried about having to walk a block or two. We should be worried about building something that people don't want to walk a block or two. I think that's a bigger risk. And, you know, if you look at shopping plazas, malls, people will park. It seems like quarter mile away and walk to the store. And that's okay, but then you get to a little downtown and people want to park right in front of the building. But I think people adapt, it'll be okay. If you have to park down the street, it'll work out. That's my take.
What about down the street? What about the town planning for potential parking problem? Planning for it before the problem creates itself. I'm not talking about people being afraid to walk a few. I'm not talking about that. All right, I'm talking about this is going to happen because this has. What's going to accompany that is a need for more parking, whether you want to think of it or not. And is the town making plans? That's all I'm saying. The next time some public property comes available in town, it's reserved for parking. All right, if it's anywhere, if it's within a half a mile of downtown.
I'll also say that the one thing that is happening that they just lost, the Great Plain Avenue improvement is getting underway. I'm not exactly sure what the time frame is, but the consultant was hired after several were selected for selection process. And that is, I mean, I think you're right. The one thing that's very important is knowing how to serve the businesses, making sure it's easy to get in and out of the businesses. There's been that balancing with, we want to have that, we want to have some seating for our restaurants also in some of those parking areas. So the balance of supporting our restaurants and also supporting the other merchants is critical. And then having the right kind of parking lot behind. The one thing that's interesting is when that parking survey was done, there was more than adequate parking. That doesn't mean that everybody knows that. That's just, as people did the numbers, they did the counts. There's definitely spaces around. The one thing that is challenging is that the parking lots are owned by different people. In behind, you know, CVS is one, behind Hillcrest Gardens, behind the churches, right? So there are multiple landowners, and so there are lots that are owned by different people. And so the one issue that is there, I think, to happen is a discussion to make it even more better signage, better striping, better coordination, so that it's used more efficiently. And so I think those are the kinds of things that are there to improve on. But I do think that one of the critical things is to serve the retailers and the restaurants and make it easy to get in and out of town, because it is something that you kind of expect to have in downtown. So I'm excited about that. And Chestnut Street is the one that also needs to benefit. So we know what Great Plain could be, and it's kind of right there in our wheelhouse. You know, how are we going to bring the bikes in? How are we going to make these park? Blah blah blah. Chestnut Street is a complete, my old boss would say, a dog's breakfast. You know, it's like everything. It's down there, so there's no order. And so setting order for that vision for Chestnut Street is important, and parking, access to all that stuff. And of course, that's to be coordinated with the future of all that housing that could happen down there. So setting the streetscape sets up all the housing, all the other mixed use. So it's huge. But the walkability of all the housing is, you know, to David's point, that's what is a huge shot in the arm for all the businesses to have the foot traffic. Okay, enough on that.
We have a question on Zoom.
Terrific. There you go. Wait.
Sorry.
Okay,
I can take it.
you can take it.
Okay.
Use it.
Thank you. Sharon, you can feel free to unmute as well, but I will raise your two questions. Sharon is asking, will the green space and age be eligible for building?
Green space and
Green space.
Green space and age.
In other words, that's 100 West. Is that the plan?
Sharon, do you want to help us clarify your question by unmuting? As I stare at the computer.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hold on. There might be a way to. All right.
You know, I'm just talking about the little park across from Starbucks and the Blue Restaurant. Is that an area that can be built upon as well, so that that would be taken away?
So like the blue Christmas tree.
Yeah, the park is.
Right, and the answer is no.
It's a park.
It's a park, it's not part of the zoning. Good question. Was there another question?
Yes, there is talk of several people trying to perhaps bringing up delaying approving movement on the Carter building. And I want to know if that happens, what happens to the plan? Either plan. Is that a possibility or?
Right, yeah, I don't know if you heard earlier, but Lee Newman is here and had talked about an amendment that there. Yeah, there is an amendment that's going to be voted on at town meeting to
That's
cap,
what I'm talking.
yeah, to cap the development. That I wouldn't characterize that as a delay. It's a change in the zoning.
Okay. To
Can you
cap the
ask someone that can
development at the
explain?
numbers now?
I'm sorry, again?
To cap the numbers of what they are now, not above 190 for apartment buildings, or?
Right, it's,
So, I don't know.
Can you hear Lee?
yeah, just talk right into it,
Okay,
Lily.
so
Yeah,
basically, I can just explain what the proposal is currently. So the proposal basically is to create as of right zoning on that property. But to limit it to 44 dwelling units per acre, which under the state's formula would yield approximately 189 units, and that's on the high end because that's calculated based on the square footage. This would be generated for that building divided by 1,000. And then there's a provision that allows the planning board to grant a special permit to go above that number that's currently not capped. And the proposal with the amendment is to put a cap on the planning board's discretion at 53 dwelling units per acre, which I think calculates out to a cap of around 227 units at that property.
Okay.
so does that answer your question?
I think so. So we could, more units than 190 could be built on that property?
With
she
a
said-
special permit, so there would have to be the whole special permit process going before the planning board, public comment, all that stuff.
It would be a
Okay.
special permit process, which gives the planning board much more discretion than they have on doing an as of right process.
Okay, I'm having a little hard time hearing, but if the basic plan goes through, it's by right. So now you're saying Carter would be by special permit?
So there are two choices. One is by right, that's 100 and capped at 189 units. And then if there's a special permit process, they go to 227 units for the total, for the cap. So they're
Okay.
imposing a cap, but it's for the special permit, which is would be a larger building, which would be going through the discretionary process with the town.
Yeah, what I wanted to say, I heard you say something about base, and I just wanted to make sure that we weren't getting confused. The
Oh, with the base
zoning-
or the neighborhood?
Correct, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, the zoning for Avery Square is identical in each of the two plans.
That's correct. It's established in the base plan, and then when the neighborhood plan amendments come up, there are no changes made to the base, so it's just preserved.
Right, so it doesn't matter which of the plans passes. The Avery Square zoning would be what Lee described. Clear?
Okay, that makes it clear. Yep,
Yeah,
that makes
terrific.
it clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So Ed,
Does anyone know how many units per acre makes that a viable proposition? So somebody wants to develop.
Lee, you're on.
Okay, well, we've been told by the developer when he met with the planning board that 187 was satisfactory. So that's what we were told. We were told that, 187 was okay. Let's start with them.
That would make it viable
That was what was represented in the planning board.
Great books.
So yeah, I think regarding this parcel, I think the issue that I have with the process is that originally you recall that they had approached us in 2020 saying that they could, redo it, you got the inside and rebuild it at, with 150-ish kind of senior living, memory care type stuff, and then the pandemic was kind of ongoing and they pulled back, and then they came back again in 22 and they said they could do it again and pay the town about $2 million for the right to do it. So I think that, one of the disappointing things that I've heard is that this kind of assumption that they can't do it already, whereas they've already said that they could do it with the existing zoning. I don't think that, I think it's an incorrect assumption that they need to be rezoned, to get something in there. Of course, rezoning it at a larger size would help significantly. So I'm sure that the 187 is definitely something that, is sufficient to move it forward, but also it could be the case that they move forward with maybe 90 larger units, right? This goes back to the assumption about what's the split between studios, 1 beds, 2 beds, and 3 beds. And one of the questions I had was, has the shift to increase the floor area ratio limit encouraged a higher proportion of 3 and 2 bedrooms rather than 1 bedrooms? And I wish that maybe during the process that we had, the planning board or the government had really kind of like leveraged this engagement to try to get this information out of the owner who's been there the whole time. So, for example, they could just come with 93 bedrooms, or maybe it's 187 1 bedrooms, and anything in between. So, but I think that this is probably the one, regardless of how it goes on Monday, that has one of the highest potential, that it's basically, you can pencil it in, it's going to be developed within a few years.
Thank you. What else is on your mind? You all came out thinking so.
And I think, Oscar alluded to the fact that Needham has done some rezoning over the last 20 years to try to encourage or make, or even allow and encourage multifamily housing in some business districts, right? We did this on Lower Chestnut Street and downtown, Garden Street, and over mixed use 128, right?
Right.
And, this is partly probably, but very little has come of that rezoning. We've had very, very few units, multifamily units that have been built. And this is in over a 10 or 20-year period. I don't know what the exact number is, but
15.
is it 15?
It's 15. It's actually, but we redid the zoning in Needham Center and along the Chestnut Street corridor through the whole downtown planning process in 2009. And we have gotten 15 units. We got 10 in the building that was built at the intersection of Great Plain and Dedham. And that was done through the overlay. That was through the added height we gave, which is 4 stories to that location. Or it's 3 with a 7 on the 4th floor. And then there was one other project done at Oak Street, which was done under what was the underlying zone, which was basically 2.5 stories, and we got 5 stairs. So 2009 until 9. That's with the density at the FARs that are comparable to what you see in the neighborhood plan. It's at a density of, it's at a 4-story profile. It's with an FAR of 2.0. The neighborhood plan does offer an incentive though that goes a little bit beyond that, 1/2 story above that base zoning if there's workforce housing or if it's actually developed under a mixed use program.
So just what, so my conclusion is that our whole experience suggests to us that the estimates that have been given by the consultant about likely development of both of the plans probably overstated. That's my view. I think it's gonna take a lot longer, I think it's a lot fewer units. And if anybody wants to, you know, put together some sort of a grant, I mean,
Great, what else is on your mind? Zoomers?
Nothing.
I'll just check here, nothing, all right, show your back.
Well, I think just to follow on that point, I mean, yeah, I think that, it's extremely hard to say how fast things will get developed, in the rate, because I was looking, you know, I'm looking over on the, like the zoning maps, and you just see that it's, the Chestnut is such a jigsaw puzzle of random, small parcels. Some are very valuable, some are not so valuable, some have very strong existing businesses, for example, the garden center's expanded. You know, Chestnut General, I don't think is gonna be, torn down anytime soon, Sudbury Farms, Roach Brothers, et cetera. But we don't know. But I think the important thing to relay to people who might be skeptic is that, you will just have to be agile. And again, it's not really about predicting the future of these forecasts. It's about understanding what's the likely outcome and, you know, what's the low case and the high case and how we can respond. And then, I guess maybe to take maybe the opposing view about the build out stuff is that we should expect it. I mean, I'm hopeful in the future that we're gonna have even more zoning, because there's a lot on the map that I think has potential that wasn't rezoned. Like I'm thinking, for example, 100 West, I don't see why across the street wasn't also included, the whole single story.
You have an answer.
Okay,
Yeah,
And I'll
that
give
is-
it back to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'll summarize how Owen left that when Owen began.
Yeah.
Owen was looking at, and actually the state originally had said, we are going to give towns the ability to do 25% of their housing count as mixed use. And for whatever reason, they pulled that back and took it off the table. I don't know, Lee, if you ever got the explanation why HLC changed that. And I know a lot of towns, and big elections, they wrote in and said in their action plan at the end of 22, they said, why did you do that? Because it really makes a lot of sense to say to towns that are building around transit, which is typically a little bit denser area, where it's walkable, where you have commercial, why not also make that an opportunity for housing? So yes, we are, and so when Hone completed the work they did and handed off the planning board, they had left a couple of suggestions for what the planning board should address. Top of the list was the two areas, the Heights downtown and the center business downtown. Should go back and look at the overlay zoning that Lee was talking about and adjust that as necessary, so it makes more sense. And again, if we all look at the photographs before you got here, close. There were big buildings in town. There were, I mean, the Heights had 3 stories. Where Blue on Highland was 3 stories. It might have been 4. And then across the street from what was Harvey's, was a 3-story building. It might have been 4, and it had theater on the second floor. I remember it while looking at these pictures, then it was burned down. And then the office building, that's a brick building next to that, is actually rebuilt from what was a bigger building. Or was a big building. So we, you know, again, we all look at our downtown and we say, gee, but it could just be like a lot of these other downtowns we see where they're 3 stories, but you know, sadly, they've changed over the years. And so having those downtowns changing is really challenging. So we can go and change the zoning as again, as we're talking about, but then the reality sets in. You're saying somebody's gonna have to go see that all that ground floor retail, we have to do something with that, so we can go change the block and build back something taller. So working in our downtowns is challenging, but there are other areas of town potentially that we can look at, and the ADUs are coming down the road on February 2nd. ADUs are now going to be allowed by right. So the town has more options to come that are a little bit broader afield for the town to address housing. So other questions?
Yeah, but there's one on Zoom, but I'm not sure.
Thank you for that. Just on the 3-story thing, it's like sometimes you have to remind people that there are actually many 3-story buildings there currently, but they like block them out have their head like across the green field, there's like 3-story office buildings. People think it's all just like 1 story, and then when we were doing the Muzzy stuff, people were like, that's so, it's too high, like there's a 3-story building right across the street. They just don't even, you show them, like, oh yeah, I guess there is that, but, yeah, I guess there's just, more on the way, so, you don't wanna, scare people, but, should be confident that we could go well beyond, what we're seeing in the neighborhood eventually, just not even in those lots. And with Herstein and all the other things as well. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got a question on Zoom.
Yeah, I think that we may have answered your question just now, Jake, but I will raise it again or give you an opportunity to come off mute if you would like to pose the question in another way. But Jake was asking, similar to the conversation we were just having, if there have been any talks with developers about what will get developed, what the likelihood is. I know that we talked about that one parcel and the fact that developers were part of the consideration in that. But do you all know of any other areas of the map or of the new zoning where developers have
I can add to the question. I was, so specifically for the neighborhood housing plan, I know there's an incentive for developers that if they develop mixed use, they can go up, I think, half a story. So I was wondering, have we talked to any developers, or do we know if that incentive is enough to do mixed use?
Mixed use is not in the.
The question was whether or not the additional incentive for Chestnut Street, I think even on Guard Street, for the additional height for mixed use, is there enough of an incentive bump in that? And I know there was some discussion with developers by the home group. Do you know if that was specifically targeted?
I don't think that question was directly asked. I think the conversation I think we had was more focused around the process. We had a lot of questions about special permit process versus as of right process. How difficult was this permit process? Would changing the rules and the regulatory framework actually enable more housing to be built where it wasn't being built before along the Chestnut corridor of those densities? And we heard that from the larger developers, they didn't see the special permit process as being constrictive, but the smaller developers did. So it was felt that by changing the process from as special permit to as of right, you would see more development happening on properties that had historically converted.
I don't know if did you hear all that? Jake?
Oh,
Did you
yeah,
hear
yes,
all
I did
that?
hear all that. Yeah.
Okay, so I think so that wasn't a direct answer to you about whether or not there's enough of an incentive there with the half a story. So I think it's debatable. I think the one thing that it has been on my mind during this whole sort of evolution of Chestnut Street is how much do you mandate the ground floor commercial? And the one challenge with doing the mandating of ground floor commercial, particularly if you wanted to line Chestnut Street on both sides, is that you then take it off the table for it being able to count as a zone for MBTA, because the MBTA has to have by right ground up residential to be able to count it. You can have, which we've constructed in this zoning, or the town has constructed, is to say that if you do mixed use, it's beyond, it's an incentive with a special permit. And it's actually not a special permit. It just means you can do it as of right, sorry. But it is not the mandated ground floor commercial. It's an option if you do the workforce housing. And you get that extra, it's workforce housing or ground floor commercial. So you're doing either more density for a different kind of housing, which meets a more affordable number, which is if you don't know what workforce housing is, it's 80 to 120% of the AMI. Typically in a lot of the larger developments where there's a component for affordability, it's 80% of AMI, which is a 91,000 for a single person as an income to be able to afford it. So I don't know if that's a long answer there, but hopefully that gives you what you need.
Did you get an answer?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely helps. I think just the impetus behind the question is, hey, it would be great to have some first floor commercial. And It was just, hey, when we talk to developers, knowing that we cannot zone for commercial, but they have an incentive, do we think they'll actually build commercial? And it sounds like we kind of don't know, which is okay. Just wanted to know.
Right. We don't know, but there is that incentive in some of the zoning. Cool. Thank you, Jim. What else? On Zoom or not on Zoom?
I wasn't going to say anything. Really. There's an aspect of, what's going to be talked about Monday night that hasn't talked about. I haven't heard it in our meetings. But, there's a phrase that I've heard many times at town meetings, and that is, towns that Needham compares itself to. And I haven't heard much about what other towns have done, what they're about to vote on, and how their densities, proposed densities compare to Needham's. Are we laggards? Are we going to be leaders? Where are we in relation to other towns? I haven't heard anything. I think that question is likely to be asked.
All I will say is that there was back and forth with, Michael Diener on Facebook about the analysis he did with Lexington. And Lexington has, similar population and, reputation. Diversity of population, but they decided to go very big and did 220, and they're actually an adjacent community. They don't even have a commuter rail service. They have a bus service or several bus lines. So they did that. They actually voted through here, so they just saw this as an opportunity, but then they went very big. So the only thing I do know is that their number of units relative to their is 4 to 5 times larger in what is allowed by their new zoning that they proposed for their MBTA districts. And they did do a number of those with height bonuses for mixed use, which actually are quite significant. Up to 115 feet in one area, and others were between 50 and 62 feet, 52 and 60 feet. And so there's a lot of, that's one town. So it's hard to say, but that particular town was, has been used because it was also seeing a lot of development coming early. And so there was some concern that, oh my gosh, we've been assuming that we're going to get the lowest slow burn here. And Lexington has seen 960 units already proposed in their first year. And their prediction had been 400 to 800 units, and which is obviously probably they lowball it. So that's about all I know.
It seems to me that, sort of as an advocacy document, town meeting floor, it might be useful to have a summary of what Lexington has done as compared to what Needham is proposing. And it will make what Needham is proposing to do look much more modest. I think that's useful. I don't know what West Needham is doing. Do you? What is West Needham?
Well, yeah.
Well, if you did, we can look into trying to get that information, but the issue is, is that the commuter rail towns needed to apply by the end of 23. There were like 25. So a whole bunch of us have to apply by the end of this year. And we haven't yet. We're not the only ones.
Right.
So I think there's maybe over 30 that applied so far. And the earlier ones have subways, so they're kind of different towns than we are. A lot. I mean, there's Cambridge, Brookline, right? I mean, they're just not comparable. And so we can try to get more of that information, but I do hear what you're saying about specific, being very, they went really big, and also their plots of land are very different. It's kind of not comparable, even though our towns.
You just took care of the question I had. If you're going to be saying, how do we stand in the, got to use comparable facts. Needham doesn't have any buildable lots around anymore. What about Lexington or any other towns around, if you're going to use that?
Lexington's, I don't think they had a lot of greenfield. They had a lot of lower density commercial buildings that would be, so when they went through, and it's interesting, if you look at their map, it's quite dispersed. It's not on a corridor, it's not on trains, it's on bus lines. So there are pockets that are zoned. And they have different densities for the different pockets, but most of them are but at a lower density. And so when they put that all together, they decided that they were gonna have the thresholds for those different zones. And so that gave them, to their mind, they wanted to spread it around. And so they weren't concentrating everything in one location. So they figured this was a good thing for their town to be able to distribute the land that was going to be dedicated to it. But they also targeted to primarily commercial. There are a couple of single family lots. And that's about it. And so the single family are what that were targeted were actually rather oversized lots. So they actually lent themselves to becoming developed as multifamily by themselves instead of having to put things together. But there were some other smaller commercial lots that were on in a commercial area, residential commercial lots that were put together in a little bit of a downtown section. So it's a very different animal, but they were different how they targeted it because they had the flexibility to do it along bus routes. So there were these different pockets, and they could target what we looked like underdeveloped. So there were one-story buildings with lots of open space. It could logically change.
What else? We'll check into the Zoom people too. Anything else that you would hope to hear or hope we would all talk about? Or that you would like to share? Zoomers, anybody? I don't see anything.
Are we talking to folks in Wellesley about what they're doing?
They did it. And what sticks out for me, because Greg Reedman from the chamber wrote about it a lot, was that they included a big development, a big building that he says jokingly, you have to swim to public transportation from, in their zoning. And it made up a huge percentage of the numbers they had to hit. It was a building that was already built and almost all leased. So, there is the letter of the law, and then there's the spirit of the law. And they seem to have gone for the letter of the law, and did that, rather than the spirit.
So how do their numbers compare with them?
That I don't. But the number, correct me if I'm wrong, the number was a formula, like the 1784, came from the 11,000 whatever residential units that we have. So it's totally tied, not to population, but to residential units, right?
I think they're similar to us in numbers, but they're different in how they allocate.
Are they proposing the same heights and the same density?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think they're understanding that it, and I think it's clear the work that Home did and other developers and the conversation with developers and with the consultants. When you look at what is the trigger for developers to be able to build something, it is in that sweet spot of likely to be 3 and above, closer to 4. Some guys don't even think about it if it's not filed. So for Wellesley, the bigger project, I think, is 4 stories.
Yeah.
And so that was a big chunk of theirs. So I think that gave them more flexibility for locating everything else. I don't know their map inside and out in numbers, and we should, but.
I want to say one thing about Wellesley. You could go shopping at Wellesley. You'd have a hard time going shopping in. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's tons of stores there. It's almost like a mall. And I'm not advocating for that, but I am saying there's a certain level of economic vibrancy and the kinds of local businesses that everybody wants to flock to. I don't think you come from another town to eat them for our stores. You do for our restaurants, not for our stores. And one of the things that more housing could drive is additional economic vibrancy earlier, and that is something Wellesley has that we don't.
as much.
Charles, Cambridge, then complimentary, they would.
That's putting it mildly. Yes, yes, I have.
And I think that also comes from the business community, a lot of it
Oh,
from
yeah.
our institutions, the business community that are clearly seeing the need and the demand for their constituents and their workers.
Yeah.
And their
And
communities.
and employees and foot traffic, they want foot.
If there are,
Yeah, no, yeah, I want to mention that there's stuff on the table. There's some more information. There are lovely buttons into housing opportunities, and there are long signs. One of them is about the neighborhood housing plan, so that goes down in value after Monday night, regardless of the vote. But the other ones are in perpetuity. And if you'd like to have, we would love to have you back. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate your questions and participation.
Yeah.
thank you all to viewers.
We have a couple people left. Yes, thank you guys.
Bye.
Beverly, you're muted if you're trying to talk to us. Bye.
Yes,
You know,
thank you.
Yeah.
What do you, where is it? Bye, thank you. Do you have a question, Beverly?
Oh, well, I'm bringing back what I did.
Chef, question.
I think she's trying to unmute.
Thank you for all of your.
Oh, she was trying to leave. Okay.
Well,